Welcome to the Healthy Seas podcast, a show about what we need to do to have just that, healthy seas and a healthy future. I'm your host, Crystal DiMichelli, and in each episode, we talk about the problems facing the seas and oceans and the solutions we have to fix them. Come on in, the water's fine. Today, I'll be chatting with Nicole Yeomans. Nicole is the Offshore Industrials Lead and a marine ecology expert from NatureMetrics, a company at the cutting edge of biodiversity monitoring using environmental DNA, otherwise known as eDNA. They've developed a way to collect microscopic traces of DNA from air, water, and soil to get a snapshot of the species and ecosystem health in an area. It's a game changer, allowing industries, governments, and conservation groups to understand and protect nature like never before. And the impact is huge. NatureMetrics is even a finalist for the Earthshot Prize this year. So let's dive in and discover how this incredible technology is reshaping conservation and giving us all a way to make better choices for the planet. Nicole, it's so great to be able to chat with you today. Thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you.
I'm excited to talk about eDNA because it seems to be very of the times. And also, you guys are finalists for an Earthshot Prize. So that's super exciting. I want to learn about all of the above. So let's first start with, what is eDNA?
So, eDNA or environmental DNA is the microscopic clues that all life on Earth leaves behind as it moves through its environment. So, you and I, as we walk through our homes, we're shedding skin and hair. And it's exactly the same in the natural environment as well. And particularly in the marine environment, it's like DNA soup out there. You have all the good stuff, scales, feces, urine, and we're able to take those microscopic clues and through the work we've been doing at NatureMetrics, we now convert those into simple metrics that allow us to understand ecosystem health through these tiny traces of DNA that's being left behind in the environment.
How exactly do you do that? Like with the soup, per se,
The DNA
of
soup.
DNA, with a DNA soup?
Yeah, so in the marine environment in particular, so you can take samples of water. So we have these amazing filters that are just the size of the palm of your hand that you can pump water through. And inside the filter, that then captures all the DNA and you add a preservative to that sample. And then the DNA stops degrading, you send it back to our labs, and from that point, the lab team will extract the DNA that's found in the sample, they amplify it and they sequence it, and then they match the sequences that they've found within that sample against a database where they're able to identify particular species. And through a process called metabarcoding, which means that we can look at many different species, we're then able to take those species and convert it into ecosystem health metrics that give us an understanding of the complexities of the ecosystem.
And this could be a sample anywhere?
Yes, I mean, obviously, this is a marine focused podcast. So, in the marine environment, you can do water and sediment, but we can take environmental DNA samples across all different biomes. So, you can take samples from air as well as fresh water. There's lots of different ways in which you can collect this data, which is absolutely mind-blowing for me. I always get excited about any of the data sets that we still see coming from clients' projects because it just absolutely captures the imagination to think that you can just take a simple sample of water and sequence the DNA within it and see across the whole tree of life. So from bacteria to blue whales.
When did this become a viable solution?
I think it was in the early 2000s that there was a lot of focus, a lot of research was done. And then in the last maybe 10 years since NatureMetrics being born, it's become a scalable solution that's now being utilized by many different types of organizations. So it's not just focused on research anymore. Like, this is something that's being rolled out by global corporations, governments, regulatory bodies, NGOs. Like, there's so many different ways in which these companies can utilize this data and really need to get ahead of ecosystem health and start measuring biodiversity.
Why would a company or a government or a non-research facility be interested in this kind of thing?
That's a really good question. So there are many different reasons now that corporations actually are wanting to future proof themselves and get ahead of the regulatory requirements that are coming down the pipeline to monitor their nature related risks and independencies. There are also processes like the environmental impact assessment. So, for example, we see a lot of offshore wind developers that use our technology to increase the robustness of the data that they're collecting in non-invasive ways on fish that can then be incorporated into environmental impact assessments. We're also seeing that corporate clients also have their own nature positive targets, and they can use this data to, say, for example, if we're looking at a global mining company, they might want to roll this out across all of their mine sites and understand, are they meeting their nature positive targets? So there's many different ways in which huge corporations now can use this technology, and it's really exciting to see it being rolled out at such an incredible scale.
Why is monitoring biodiversity important? Why should companies be concerned in doing that?
Well, it's so important to understand sort of how our ecosystems are functioning right now, because we all depend so heavily on Mother Nature for fresh water and the air that we breathe. And without measuring and monitoring biodiversity, there's no way in which we can understand, like, are there any impacts to the ecosystem? Like, we can use this tool to understand ecosystem degradation. Are there impacts to protected and endangered species? And really use the data to understand how we can conserve and restore our planet for everybody.
How does this technology differ than what was done in the past? And how is it better and what are its limitations?
So, the thing that I find absolutely incredible about this technology, and I'm biased obviously, but I do think it's incredible, is that you can go out and take a single sample, and like I said earlier, you can assess that sample across the whole tree of life. Whereas traditionally, if you were going out to do a baseline survey, again, like let's say offshore wind, you would need specialist ecologists to go out and do marine mammal observations or fish surveys or survey the plankton. We can do that with our environmental DNA samples analysis. So it's pretty incredible, and it saves a lot of time and resources when out in the field, that you don't need that. You don't need separate specialists, because we can help you understand the whole tree of life. And so much of those surveys to date have been focused on charismatic megafauna or things with spinal cords, and they've really been overlooking all of the smaller organisms that are really important for a healthy functioning ecosystem, like the bacteria, the fungi, the plankton. And we're able to capture all of that data in one sample.
What are its limitations, though? I mean, this sounds so amazing. It Is there something that the traditional way is the better way to go at times?
Yeah, so there are certainly, I mean, we have a lot of projects where they utilize environmental DNA alongside traditional methods to do sort of comparisons against them.
Mm.
A lot of the projects that I've actually seen, we do blow them all out the water, no pun intended, but we were able to capture so much more data than using the traditional methods. And quite often they're really invasive as well. You're looking at nets and trawls, or like using even many outdated techniques like binoculars. And we could be stood on one end of the boat looking out to spot whales, and there are several whales behind us or underneath us that we just don't see. So, and that's where environmental DNA comes in, and it's able to capture that information.
So how long does DNA last in the environment? Like if you get a sample and you find that XYZ is in that area, was it something that they just passed by the area, or could it be 5 years ago they happened to be there? How long does the DNA, how long is it good for, I guess?
I was really surprised by this when I started working at NatureMetrics, but it actually degrades really quickly in the marine environment, which is great because it
Oh,
gives us a snapshot of the biodiversity that was present in that area. So because we have factors like pH, temperature, sunlight, that's all beating down on the marine environment and degrading the DNA that's been left behind really quickly. The peer-reviewed data suggests that it lasts around 24 to 48 hours in the marine environment, and it's quite close to source as well, which means that it's very localized too. So there's been like community differences in distances around 60 to 100 meters away, which is really close, to have those differences. So we're quite lucky in the marine environment that it degrades so quickly, and it does give us this incredible snapshot of the biodiversity that's present.
wow. Can your samples determine the abundance of a species, or, if one animal walks by or you have 30 or 300?
Yeah, so environmental DNA is a great tool for relative abundance, which allows you to see which species are more common compared to others, but they don't pick up the individual numbers of each species. There are certain variations in the way that DNA is shed by different organisms. So, like, for example, fast moving fish will shed a lot of DNA compared to slower moving, bigger organisms. But with the relative abundance, we still get really interesting ecological information. So, like, over time, you can see things like migratory patterns or spawning events still from that data, just you can't count the individuals.
Okay. So then, I mean, if for some reason that is needed, more in-depth or focused research would have to happen, I assume.
Yeah, so I think traditionally you would have to go out and actually count the number of individuals that were spotted
Yeah.
to get that data. So still, it's very non-invasive and a very easy way of collecting relative abundance, which is still super interesting for understanding ecosystem health.
Can you give us an example of an application of this technology in regards to ocean conservation?
Okay, I'm probably going to go off on a real tangent now, but I'm going to tell you about one that one that is really close to my heart because it's my favorite project to date. And I know you shouldn't have favorite projects, but this one just blows my mind. So we worked with MSC Cruises and MSC Foundation on a huge project last year where they were actually real pioneers in this approach of sampling on board cruise vessels. So basically, on board the cruise vessels, they have ways in which they bring in seawater that cools down the engines. And we were able to take samples of the cooling water in the engine room. So I even had to put a hard hat on and and a boiler suit and steel toe caps the first time that we went to figure this out, if this was going to work, to sort of work with the crew to see like how easy is this for them, because we wanted to create something that was potentially scalable and transformative that you could do across all the different vessels. So we found a way in which they could easily just turn on the tap in the engine room and take a sample of water. So they did this every day, strategic cruise routes. So these cruise routes were chosen because of the way that they passed through environments that were increasingly under threat. So there were 3 different vessels, over 11 cruisers, which went around Svalbard and Iceland and Greenland. We were able to detect over, I think, nearly 4,000 different species were detected. And One of my friends at NatureMetrics referred to the data set as like watching the movie Elf, because there were there were puffins, there were these huge charismatic whale species like fin whales and sperm whales, there were reindeers, like the data was just incredible. And
So even land mammals
yeah,
appeared
those that are using
in the
the
water samples.
coastal areas. So just off the coast of Greenland, we were finding the reindeer. So linking that coastal region, which is so important for understanding healthy
Mhm.
ecosystem. So yeah, the data actually captured, I think, 22 different IUCN Red List species. So the thing that was so impactful about this project is that the mission was to fill in ocean data gaps. So not just collecting data, like, well, how can we have the most impact with this project? So because we have such a close relationship at NatureMetrics with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, we're able to then share the data that's collected from the cruise vessels with the IUCN. So if they would be able to then utilize that to update the red list, which means that this data can then be used to support lasting conservation decision making in our oceans. So for me, it's a really incredible project, and we're having a lot of really great traction from other players in the industry right now. And it just really inspires me, because something that resonated with me when we set out to do this project was the fact that their vessels used to report the weather back to land. Like for so many years, like ships were reporting data that was useful back to land. And I was like, well, imagine if they start to do that for biodiversity. Like, imagine all the ships out there, if they can just take a single sample on a daily basis and share that with the likes of the IUCN Red List, who can then, use that for conservation decision making. They're going on these routes over and over and over. There's nothing of this scale ever been done before. And yeah, we really just hope that more companies take this up, because it's really inspiring. It's inspiring for those users of cruise ships as well. So like the guests as well. We take that data and we put it into our nature intelligence platform as well, which allows you to spatially interrogate where the various species were found and track ecosystem health using some of our different metrics like species richness and evolutionary diversity. So you can actually share that with a wide range of stakeholders and inspire the future generation of marine biologists. So I told you I was going to go off on one about it, but it's just, for me, it's really impactful, and especially because a lot of the cruise industry and the shipping industry, like, they are very focused on cetacean collision avoidance, and this data over time can help build up a real rich picture of where those cetaceans are, at what time of year they're there. Like, maybe over time it will start to allow different choices to be made with like route selection at certain times of years. So it can have a real impact. So I'm super proud of that project and working in the industry. But they can also track restoration projects too. So there's been a real focus in the industry on decarbonization, and that's obviously the priority right now. But we're seeing many people understand that biodiversity, we need to take action for biodiversity and understand our impacts on the natural environment and look to restore it. So there are companies out there that are doing seagrass restoration or coral reef restoration, mangrove planting. Like, you can use this as well to monitor and measure the success of those projects. So there are lots of different ways in which they can apply it.
Excellent. I think you said before the health of the population, but I think you meant in terms of numbers, perhaps. But can you actually see diseases within populations?
When we were talking about ecosystem health, what we're talking about is the array of different species. So the community, which is really important to understand, like the breadth of the community that's in the ecosystem. And then the different metrics which we use to understand ecosystem health. So we have species richness, which is the number of different species found within the site that you've been sampling. And then you have evolutionary diversity. So the more diverse an environment is, usually the more ecologically robust it is. And then we have other ecosystem health metrics. If we talk about the marine environment, we have fish metrics that help us also get an understanding of healthy fish communities. So they would look at things like top predators, and are there lots of top predators in the environment, because that would usually indicate a healthy ecosystem. Like, are there sensitive species? So it's this kind of picture that we're looking for, rather than necessarily disease, but you can infer sort of a healthy ecosystem based on those different metrics that you then track over time.
Have you come across DNA that you didn't know what it belonged to? Like it may be a newly discovered species?
Yeah, so they pick up DNA that isn't within the databases quite a few times. But what we would do is record that up to genus level. So we'll be able to say what group it belonged to.
Okay.
So we're
Okay.
still able to detect the group, but it's usually dependent on when the reference libraries would be updated if it was a new species.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exciting.
I told you, it's very exciting. It's mind-blowing.
It really is.
Yeah.
Are there any animals harder to detect than others?
So sharks are notoriously difficult to detect because they
Hmm.
actually don't shed a lot of DNA.
Okay.
And yeah, they have large migratory patterns. There's maybe not so many of them in the environment. So yeah, they are quite difficult to detect. We do pick them up occasionally,
Mm.
but they're notoriously difficult.
Yeah. And you can even analyze coral species in the area, I assume.
Yeah, so corals are also quite difficult to detect with environmental DNA, but one of the things, and we have picked them up before, I think we've definitely detected a number of cold water coral species, but one of the things that environmental DNA is great at is understanding those organisms that indicate a healthy coral reef ecosystem. So the fish, the invertebrates, vertebrates, we're able to detect those really well. So we can sort of understand the reef ecosystem health and the dynamics of the reef using those species as indicators.
You also have a DIY, do it yourself kit to collect samples and some citizen science projects in the UK. Can you tell me more about those?
Yeah, so we actually, one of the things that's really important is making these kits usable for anybody. So, like I've said earlier on, you don't have to be a trained ecologist. Anybody can take one of these samples. So, traditionally, you would have to like all these specialists, whereas now anyone can go out with our kits and take a DNA sample. So, our founder, Kat, actually went out with a number of school children to the local pond, I think it was, and they compared the results that the school children took against the results of the founder of NatureMetrics to see sort of what the comparison was between the data that was collected, and it was pretty much identical. So it just another way of showing the way in which it's so user friendly and that anybody can go out and take this data.
That's really great. And I mean, if I were a kid, learning about all the different species that might be in your backyard pond has got to
Yeah, I
be
would have been absolutely
really
fascinated.
engaging. Mhm. I would have been too. NatureMetrics seems to make a great effort in the development of better and better ways to display and narrate the data in corporate and conservation settings. You mentioned it briefly when you were talking about the cruise. So once you analyze all of these samples and you have this massive amount of data, these numbers, these species names, how do you make sense of it for your clients? How do you communicate it to be relevant to their needs?
So previously, when I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but when we were more of a lab services provider before we moving towards this more holistic approach when monitoring biodiversity and using nature intelligence, some of the outputs of this used to be that we would sequence the DNA and we'd match the DNA to the species that were found in the samples, and you would get a report and an Excel spreadsheet with the list of the species detected with all the Latin names. And that is incredible if you're a scientist or like a bit of a geek like me and you like Excel spreadsheets. But we've really been working hard to make this data something that can be used to communicate with a wide range of audiences. So we have a nature intelligence platform that you can visualize where the samples were taken spatially. It brings the data to life because we have a species list that then there are images and there are details on like the biology of those species that have been detected. So immediately it's so much more engaging for not just the ecologists out on site. You've got the up at the board level, if there are people that have made nature positive commitments and at the board level they want to understand, how's the biodiversity changing over time, they can use this platform in a way that communicates it to a wide range of stakeholders. It converts the data into simple metrics, so just a number. And we even have little traffic light systems, so you can see like is the biodiversity increasing since the last round of sampling. It's very intuitive. It's one way in which organizations can track all of their biodiversity data in one place across their portfolio. So if you imagine different cruise or shipping companies, for example, they might be sampling from different cruise vessels, so they would have their vessel data within there. They might have restoration sites. They might be tracking invasive species in ports. You can monitor all of that in one place using the nature intelligence platform. So we've worked really hard to make this something that communicates to many, many different people, not just scientists.
It feels like while in the last years, a lot has been done in the area of reporting for emissions, not much has been done for biodiversity. What needs to change and what is coming in the future for this area?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right there. Like, so much has been done towards climate. So now there are really robust ways of reporting emissions data and in ways that communicates really easily to businesses the value and the risk to their companies. So we need to get ahead now. We need to catch up with biodiversity data because biodiversity and climate are interlinked. They're very much entwined, and the technology now exists in which we can assess the complexities of nature in ways that we can report that data so that businesses can better understand the value and scale of nature risks and make better operational and financial decisions. So it's really converting that complexity of nature into something simple that can be reported on in ways in which we've been able to do with climate to date. But biodiversity is so messy because it's not just greenhouse gas emissions. There are many different organisms involved in a healthy functioning ecosystem. And that's what we're trying to do here is make the complex simple in ways that can align with business operations and reporting so that it can be easily communicated and rolled out. So that businesses also don't just see this data as a way of meeting compliance. They also can use it to future-proof themselves as well and make meaningful contributions to a sustainable future.
You guys are now the finalists in the Earthshot Prize, which is such an accomplishment. How will that help you, and what are your future plans?
So, firstly, I want to say how proud I am to work for a company that's a finalist in the Earthshot Prize because that is such an incredible achievement. Like, we're all as a company super proud to be nominated, and fingers crossed we win in November. But if we were to win, I think some of the main goals from that would be to continue really creating a robust and interconnected understanding of biodiversity that can really empower companies to make better decisions for nature and really foster collaboration as well amongst different stakeholders. So from finance to local ecologists, we really need organizations to align the true complexity of nature to drive transformative change.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This has been so interesting, and good luck in winning the Earthshot Prize.
Thank you.
Healthy Seas is a nonprofit on a journey from waste to where. Founded in 2013, the organization aims at reducing marine litter caused by lost fishing gear through cleanup, prevention, and education activities. The nets collected by Healthy Seas are subsequently reused and recycled and used by its partners for the creation of new products.